Welcome to Japan Seikatsu. I'm Ian, and today I'd like to discuss the 4 key benefits as I see it for working with Japanese organizations. As background, this will be informed by my nearly decade of experience of working for Japanese organizations, both public sector while I was on the JET program, but more recently the private sector as well, with my current Japanese employer, which is in the investment management industry. As always, if you enjoy this content, please do click like and subscribe to help grow the Japan Seikatsu community. Let's get started. The first big benefit, as I see it, is the relentless focus on excellence that permeates Japanese society. There was a movie, The Last Samurai, that came out in 2003 with Tom Cruise and Ken Watanabe. It's one of my favorite films. I'm shocked, but on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got only a 66% view. On Japan Seikatsu Tomatoes, it's 100%. So I highly recommend, if you haven't seen Last Samurai, to give it a look. And also curious to hear from you, your favorite Japan-related movies, so please do put them down in the comments section. I have many others, and I plan to do future videos on some Japanese movies. But back to the point, which is the focus on excellence. And there's a scene in The Last Samurai where Tom Cruise's character is making an observation about Japanese culture that struck me when I first saw this film, and still strikes me as so true. Let's take a listen.
They are an intriguing people. From the moment they wake, they devote themselves to the perfection of whatever they pursue. I have never seen such discipline. I am surprised to learn that the word samurai means to serve, and that Katsumoto believes his rebellion to be in the service of the emperor.
Pursuit of excellence, discipline, always aiming to do better. This is an important part of Japanese organizations. It's an important part of Japanese culture. It's part of the reason why Japan dominates top 10 ranking for Michelin stars. They have half of the top 10 restaurants. For some perspective, France, which is world famous for excellent cuisine, has only 1. So there is this relentless focus on mastery where they will focus on perfecting the food over decades, and they really become world class. And it's not just cooking. It's not just automobiles or cameras or some of the hardware that Japan has become famous for, but it's really, you see it in everyday life. Interesting story where this always reminds me of this scene in Last Samurai was when I was in Shikoku. I was working and living next to a middle school, and there was a school bus that every day would drive up through the mountains to pick up all the students. And it was a beautiful little bus. It had this drawing along the side of the mountain, the rivers, and the name of the school. And what struck me was that every single day, this bus driver would wash the bus. He would clean the inside. He would literally be outside with a hose, with a sponge, just scrubbing down the entire outside of the bus so that it was immaculate. And, I can understand doing that maybe once a month, maybe a bit more frequently, but he would do it every single day. And as an American, I was almost like, what's the purpose? It's, you just did this yesterday. The bus is still clean. But again, it's this discipline. It's this pursuit of perfection. It's more than just cleaning a bus. He took great pride in his job. And you think about the job of a bus driver. You're responsible for dozens of children getting access to their education, getting them safely from home to school, through the mountains, from school back to home. And you think about most jobs in society and the critical role that they play, even though often we really don't pay homage to it. I think recently with this global situation, we've all recognized more how important a lot of jobs are that were maybe overlooked in the past. But this guy just took so much pride in his bus, and I saw this everywhere in Japan. And in Japanese companies, it's that same high level of excellence that is expected. And in part, it's expected because customers expect it. The positive of that is it raises your game. You no longer see this level as acceptable. It's now you need to be at this level. So you yourself become more focused on details. You yourself become more focused on doing whatever it is that you're doing to the best of your abilities, and it makes you a better person. So, number one benefit to working in Japanese companies is that culture of excellence, which will bring out the excellence in you. Number two is stability. So when I came out of university, it was 2007, and the world was about to change. All of a sudden, we had Bear Stearns nearly go under. Then we had Lehman Brothers go bankrupt, and we were in the midst of the worst financial storm that we've had in at least my lifetime. Luckily, I was employed and I was working for a large American company. And what I saw was people got let go. Now, I can understand that. This was a very difficult environment. Companies, need to make difficult decisions when you're getting less revenue coming in. You can't afford the same cost structure. And early, I started seeing people that were closer to retirement getting let go. Then I started seeing people that were younger getting let go. And then I saw somebody that I knew very well I'd worked with who was in his 30s get let go, and I knew he was a great worker. And that was a wake-up call for me that this isn't a career for me. I don't want to commit myself to a company for 10, 20 years to then only be shown the door as soon as times get tough. And again, this is a generalization, but it was an observation that I made that generally speaking, when times get tough, American companies are more willing to lay people off. And again, there are pros and cons to this approach, and difficult decisions need to be made when you go into a recession or business dynamics change. Now, having said that, what I observed with Japanese companies was when the storm comes, the belt is tightened, but it's felt throughout the organization. So rather than a knee-jerk reaction of let's let these people go, maybe it's let's reduce bonuses, or all of us are not going to have a pay raise this year. There seems to be a more of a collective approach to let's all share the sacrifice, the burden, and just push through this period, get to the other end. And it's same with if there's a particular division of a Japanese company that's not doing well, rather than just shutting it down and laying off all the workers, often they will try to move those workers to other parts of the organization. And again, I want to emphasize that this is just my observations and informed by my experience. So this is what I found. And so that stability of Japanese organizations, I find attractive because you can, rather than spending that mind space on, well, what happens at the next recession if I get laid off, you can take that worry and instead direct it into the job and focusing on your career building and trying to do what's best for the company, knowing that you're pretty confident you will be employed. And if a storm comes, yes, there will be a shared sacrifice, but people won't be cut overboard. And I have experienced this. We went through a very difficult period, beginning of this pandemic. Markets were crashing. There was tremendous amount of uncertainty. And the message from my company was, we are going to do everything in our power to weather this together. Let's keep focusing on moving forward, delivering excellence, and they did. They did, and that really meant a lot to me. They pushed through, and they've been able to do quite well, and they did it by keeping everybody on board. So that left a positive impact on me. Number two for me is stability as a key benefit to Japanese organizations. Number three is a culture of collaboration, and this can be frustrating for a lot of people that come from outside Japan into Japanese companies. Why am I having to update so many people on what I'm doing? Or why does our team have to update so many other teams on what we're doing? Why is this decision taking so long? Why do we need to check this with this group and this group? Fair enough. But what I found is that in the West, you are more likely to more quickly ram stuff through. It's going to get out the door. Other groups aren't always as informed of what's going on. And then sometimes you get a bit of a mess because this part of the organization wasn't informed. This gets out the door, and there's some kind of unintended consequence. Maybe this needs to get pulled back. Maybe this has a negative impact on this part of the business. So it can sometimes, in the long run, actually take and absorb more resources because stuff's getting out the door so quickly without fully collaborating with all the other teams. Now, I will also say this can be a positive mechanism because sometimes some of these companies outside of Japan where there's more of a fast pace, let's just get it 80% there, get it out the door. That form of kind of innovation can sometimes win just because you're producing so much more. You're 80% there, you then do the polish once it's out the door to get it up to 100%. So there is something to be said for that management approach, but I have appreciated in a Japanese company the benefit of taking your time to share more information, to provide a bit more background, and before going to market with a project or an advertising campaign, you know that you've got everyone on board. And when you go big. Just as a small example, I remember when I was starting at my company, we were doing an advertising program, and we were running the advertisement in the US. I was responsible for getting it out. We launched it, it went well. My wider Japan marketing team, I had a colleague come up and say, did you let the team know in an email, sharing the advertisement, an explanation, etc.? And I said no, and I'm happy to do that. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, is this really necessary? This advertisement doesn't really impact the Japan business. So, do we really need to be sharing this information? I did share it. And what I found was that in sharing it, the other part of the business goes, that's an interesting concept. We may be able to use it in our market. And I've seen this dynamic happen many, many times where these unintended fruits occur because you're information sharing and the benefits of collaboration. And I just like that if you do everything properly, then when you do go to market, you're not out on a limb by yourself. You've got a whole team with you. And you've kind of, rather than leveraging the IQ of one person or two people, you've leveraged the IQ of many people. And so I think you can sometimes go to market with a stronger oomph. So in conclusion, what I appreciate is the focus on collaboration that is so key to Japanese organizations. The fourth benefit of working for Japanese culture is the amount of company support you receive. So a lot of times people will compare salaries of Japan with other countries and say, well, in this metric, it looks like in Japan, the average salary is lower. And what I would caution them to consider is to look at some other factors, which are cost of living. And I think you'll find that if you're comparing a London or a New York or Shanghai or a Singapore with Tokyo, that Tokyo is actually less expensive than a lot of people perceive, especially if you're slightly outside of the city. And on that note, this support that you get from Japanese companies often isn't considered when looking at the salaries. So it's pretty standard in Japan that your train pass will be paid for by the company. That can be a huge cost saving. So for a while, I lived very far from my company outside of downtown Tokyo, and it was 2 hours door to door that I was doing one way. And the cost was about $10 each way, so it's $20 a day. And so this train pass was almost $5,000 that the company was paying to cover the cost of me commuting in and out to the office every day. And you can also use this train pass, this tekiken, on the weekends as well, as long as you're within that same route. So it's a huge benefit when you think about it. But beyond train passes, a lot of companies, especially with younger workers, will subsidize their housing costs. So they may have a company dorm. When I was on the JET program teaching English in Shikoku, I lived in dormitory style housing, I guess you could call it, and it was around $100 a month. Another one is bonuses. I found that Japanese companies, it's almost standard culture that employees get a bonus twice a year, some it's once a year, but it's a sizable bonus of 2, 3, 4 months of your normal salary. And this is in the public sector, it's also in the private sector. We do have bonuses in the US, but they just weren't as large as they are at Japanese companies. Health checks is another thing. When I was teaching English in Shikoku or when I was working in Tokyo, the company required that we had a health check done each year. So every single year I was in Japan, I was getting these annual health checks, which is a great practice. When I was working in the US, there was health insurance, but it wasn't like everybody from the company was getting their health checked. And so sometimes you let it slip and 2 years go by and you haven't done a health check. Finally, cafeterias. So some of the larger companies have cafeterias where you can get food and it's usually subsidized. So you're going to pay less money. So in conclusion, there's this nice support that you receive from a lot of Japanese companies, which isn't really evident when you're just looking at the salary. Please do let me know down in the comments section if there's other benefits that you've heard of or you yourself have received from Japanese companies. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that most of the things I've mentioned are positives as I've experienced them, and for my personality type, I appreciate. So it could be different depending on your personality type, and most definitely taken to the extreme, these can become hindrances. And we have seen that with some Japanese companies that have struggled to adapt to the last 20 years of digitization. So if we take stability, for example, if a company is just too much focused on stability, it starts to become boring and maybe even risk averse, which is not good when you need to constantly keep innovating. And the same goes for focus on excellence. If there's too much focus on everything needs to be perfect, that too can impede innovation. So taken to its extreme, this is not always a good thing. Collaboration is the same. Yes, you should be sanity checking with key stakeholders, large projects, what you're working on before moving forward. But again, any of this taken to extreme can inhibit innovation, can turn into a negative. It could be very frustrating to probably work in. So it needs to be that healthy balance. But for me, on balance, what I've listed today is what attracts me to Japanese organizations. Well, I'm very curious what your experience is, and if you have any questions or comments, please do put them down below. Well, as always, don't forget to click like and subscribe, and thank you for your time.